All right, this is my presentation on global LGBTQ rights. Specifically, we're just going to be focusing on how rights of LGBTQ plus individuals are being affected throughout the world. But before we get into any of that, a little bit about me. My name is Brandon Booth. I am a senior at Bloomsburg University and a political science major. Now, that being said, let's get right into our discussion about LGBTQ plus rights around the world. And to get started on that, we're actually going to talk about the definitions, specifically how we're framing this conversation, just so it's kind of understood what are meant by certain terms and specifically rights. But anyway, so first getting into what is LGBTQ plus, that includes a wide variety of different gender orientation, sexual orientations, and other diverse lifestyles, including people attracted to the same or multiple genders, people whose gender identity is distinct from the sex they were assigned at birth, those who maybe reject traditional gender labels, and then many other lifestyles such as asexuality, gender fluidity, things like that. Um, when we talk rights, we're going to talk about a couple different kinds, specifically things like decriminalization, whether it is legal to undergo a sex change or to get married to someone of the same sex. We're talking about civil protections, like whether they're protected under a right of law, and then state recognition, like whether gay marriage or something like that would be recognized by the state. But just to get started, we'll start with the United Nations definition. And the United Nations says everyone deserves equal rights, freedom from violence, persecution, discrimination, harassment, and stigma, including LGBTIQ plus individuals. I just kind of like to, or wanted to start with that, just to kind of frame that this is like an issue of rights, and that's determined by, the United Nations themselves. So with that in mind, let's start to look at how these rights are being, celebrated or attacked in different parts of the world. So first, we're going to start with some of the more progressive countries, countries that are doing better. And I want to preface these are countries that are doing better, not necessarily countries that are doing well, right? This is whenever it comes to a fight for rights, there is very often, especially for these marginalized groups, a perfect answer. Um, and for all of the countries that I'm going to begin to talk about, like a lot, it could be better, and a lot more could be done. But I also think it's important to celebrate kind of the successes that we do see. So, 35 countries now legally recognize marriage equality. That marriages between two people of the same biological sex is to be held equally with a more traditional view of marriage. And while again, only 35 is disappointing, it is good to see that that is more than it has ever been. Um, Along with this, we're seeing increased rights for transgender or non-gender conforming people. In Germany and Spain, we've seen recent pushes and success with self-determination, meaning that people can determine their own gender and change that legally at will, giving them a lot more, you know, free use over how they want to identify and not having to go through like entire huge bureaucratic changes. Um, but so a lot of where we're seeing like these 35 countries and countries that are doing better are in Western and Northern Europe. Countries like Norway, Iceland, Spain, I already mentioned, and Germany. Countries like these are where we're seeing some of the most progressive gender and LGBTQ plus ideologies. And then also in the Americas, there's in Canada and in various parts of Latin and South America, we're actually seeing, including Argentina and Brazil, we are actually seeing great pushes towards LGBTQ plus rights. The United States is still one of the more progressive countries on this, but we're going to talk about some of the issues that are going on a little bit later in this presentation. So these are countries that are just outright hostile, and countries specifically in the Middle East, such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and other countries that are governed by Sharia law. It is a capital offense to be a member of an LGBTQ plus community. Transgenderism and homosexuality are seen as worthy of death, and there are, numerous um, killings as a punishment of being a member of this community. In other countries, a lot around Africa and other parts of the world, I mentioned Uganda and Ghana, but a lot of that region plus other regions, truthfully, there's just a criminalization where it's not that they're going to kill you, but it is considered a crime in the same way that maybe like robbing a bank would be a crime. And then in other countries, what we see is censoring. This is a very unique way of being hostile, where in countries like Russia and Hungary, LGBTQ plus communities do exist, but they've been targeted as propaganda networks. And we've seen countries like Russia and Hungary, as I mentioned, launch these anti-propaganda campaigns, and maybe not necessarily made it illegal to be homosexual, but to portray that in any form of media is illegal in these countries. And then we talk a little bit about the contested middle. I called it this because there are certain countries that are kind of in a limbo right now. So I'm going to mention 3 very specific examples and then kind of touch more on what I was talking about with a lot of developed Western nations. But in Japan and South Korea, these are countries where it is still technically not legalized to be in a homosexual marriage. However, there are really, really high levels of public support, higher than actually have ever been seen in those countries. And there is a growing belief among people in the community that it will soon be legalized. So while it hasn't yet, there are a lot of pushes being made, and it's believed that there will be eventually. India is a very unique example, is that it's kind of in this limbo phase where they recently decriminalized homosexual marriages, where it's no longer illegal to be homosexual or to be a part of, or not marriages, but being homosexual, being engaged in a relationship like that, and being a part of this community. However, they have rejected marriage equality, basically meaning that homosexual couples aren't seen as equal. So they're in a very weird limbo spot where it's hard to identify them as progressive because they do reject marriage equality, but also they're not the same as these hostile countries as they did decriminalize this. And the reason I say many Western nations is because we're seeing a right-wing push against homosexuality used as a political stunt in many nations, including here in the United States, where certain protections are being drawn back by this new like populist right push. So while even these countries that are progressive, like the United States or the United Kingdom, are some of the more progressive in the country, they're actively being regressive in some of the laws and ways that and public sentiment that are being targeted towards LGBTQ plus individuals. And for this reason, while they can, I think, can be dual identified as both in the progressive category and in the contested middle. But anyway, these are kind of the 3 things that we're seeing around the world. We're seeing this contested middle in certain countries, as I provided examples. We are seeing some of these progressive nations, specifically in Northern and Western Europe. The countries that seem to be getting a lot right in terms of economics and stuff like that also are very progressive on these issues. And then the downright hostile countries in the Middle East, in Africa, and around there. These are the sources that I've used for both the images and the information that were on the slides. Thank you so much.